All right, good morning and welcome. Today's our July webinar, and our focus today is going to be on a very, I think, interesting and relevant topic, really focused on TIP and other food allergy therapies that exist. We're going to focus mainly on OIT, but again, we'll have a Q&A at the end where you can ask any and all questions you may have. I'm Dr. Randhawa. I'm the founder and CEO of the Food Allergy Institute. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. I think this is a very relevant topic, given where the landscape is towards food allergy today. And I hope at the end of this, there's one word that you walk away with, and that word should be solution. What is the solution to this problem? How close are we to a real solution? And I think this discussion is going to provide some valuable information towards that. My background really, I think, tells the story of this organization. I started my career out 20 years ago as a ICU transplant immunologist. My work was in solid organ transplantation. And living in the ICU and working in the ICU, it was extremely difficult. You're dealing with the most complex cases. And then when I'd have patients who would lie in the next room to these transplant patients with food anaphylaxis, it just left me challenged, bothered, and really forced me to take some action. And 20 years later, with several organizations built up, this is the amount of effort and time and work it takes to really provide that kind of solutions-oriented approach. And I think that's the critical aspect of the origin of this company, where it came from, where we are now, and of course, where we're heading next. I have over 100 peer-reviewed publications and abstracts that continue to be, coming out. In fact, I just had another publication out yesterday. You can find it online, where we are taking a lot of the work we're doing towards applied math and again, challenging the current status quo in the system of how we look at research and development in modern medicine. But this is just, again, I think, an important thing to understand, given that it's really my philosophy that drives how this organization runs. It's my philosophy that drives how the Tolerance Induction Program is generated, and my background, I think, accounts for that. So our primary goals today are to talk about treatment. But I think before we step into that, I think it behooves us to look at this concept of innovation, right? Why does food allergy treatment really need innovation? And to answer that question, you really first have to look at where innovation gets funded. Where does it typically work in the US economic landscape? And unfortunately, really for the last 10 to 15 years, food allergies, the space of food allergies, receives very little funding. If you look at the NIH as an example, the NIH only funds about $10 to $20 million a year, specifically to really just a handful of universities to conduct food allergy-based research. This is for a condition that impacts 35 million Americans. Yet, if you look at the amount of funding that goes towards, say, asthma, that's about $500 million. And of course, when you get into conditions like cancer, that's in the tens of billions of dollars. So for a variety of reasons, food allergies do not get the typical funding mechanism that you see across other disease. And of course, drug companies, they are critical, to the advent of new drugs. And of course, when drug companies try to get in the space, which they did from 2012 to 2018, and they had dozens of trials essentially fail, that discourages them from continued participation. And right now, we're in a position, again, where drug companies have largely started to pull back from the R&D side of food allergy. And again, 20 years ago, when I was in this space, it was very clear to me that, families weren't going to wait for the pharmaceutical companies to come around. They were not going to wait for certain models and, certain translational and animal models to work. They wanted solutions now. And that was the onus that really I put on my back to make sure that we could get, the discovery side moving forward. 20 years later, we have conducted really the entire breadth of research, from cell science to AI, cell science to machine learning and applied math, and of course, its application towards actual patients themselves. It's also important to recognize that our research is ongoing and continues, but from the beginning, it has been funded by our own organization. To take an organization of this size and really allocate its budgets towards R&D is something that you don't find very often these days. Our ability and our strategy to really take what we have and simply make it better. We want to improve outcomes. We want to start to advance what deep remission looks like. We want to get to a point where we can absolutely remove the need of carrying an EpiPen. That's where we're moving, which is going to be, I think, critical, for the next stages. So my goal here today is to try to really, in as much of a unbiased way as possible, deliver what oral immunotherapy does and contrast it with the Tolerance Induction Program. And we'll just kind of go through various aspects, and of course, at the end, we'll open it up for general Q&A. So it's important to first ask, I mean, you're on this call for a reason. You have a child with food anaphylaxis, you yourself have food anaphylaxis, and you're curious about what, these different treatment modalities encompass. In OIT, it is the goal of OIT, the endpoint goal of OIT is to reach what they call bite safety. And that term essentially means that if someone is exposed to a small amount of their primary allergen, so let's say they're anaphylactic to peanut, that they've achieved a level of desensitization where if they happen to bite into a small amount of peanuts, say 2 or 3 peanuts, that they would either have no symptoms or no reaction, or if they had a reaction, it would be abrogated, it would be reduced by some degree. This form of desensitization, we call it frank desensitization, has been around for about 100 years. This is the same model of desensitization we use for drugs, for bee stings and like bee venom, as well as things like environmental allergens. So this type of model has been around, and again, it's a desensitization model. That's an important thing to recognize. One of the goals of OIT, however, is not tolerance, right? This is still a form of avoidance. It does not mean that an individual who finishes OIT is able to consume large amounts of these foods or eat them freely. It is the notion of OIT is to achieve a state of bite safety. It's also limited to a very specific number of allergens. If you look at the literature that's out there, OIT is conducted across a few hundred practices in the US and again, another few hundred across the world. The standardization across those is very difficult to assess. And in fact, the literature is often based on like surveys, it's like a survey is done amongst, a set number of these physicians. And when you actually survey them, most of them are typically doing OIT only to a few allergens, usually peanut, egg, and a few tree nuts. So you might find some that offer more, but the vast majority really do limit it. And it's also important to recognize one of the goals is that there is long-term daily dosing. That means if you achieve the endpoint of OIT, you are actually still consuming this very small amount of peanut every single day indefinitely. So for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that is the consumption mechanics that is necessary to maintain that level of desensitization. If you stop that level of dosing, it does not result in continued effect. And that is the endpoint goals of OIT. So again, it is still a level of avoidance. Tolerance Induction Program is really vastly different because from the very beginning, 20 years ago when I built this program, the goals were the same. And that was every patient who completes the Tolerance Induction Program should achieve disease remission. Remission is the word. And what remission means is that their immune system is in a state of not only tolerance, but from an immune standpoint, they're actually going into a state of remission where they're no longer producing these allergic pathways, these allergic antibodies triggering or what could trigger anaphylaxis. So from an immune standpoint, what that equals to clinically is that a patient who completes the Tolerance Induction Program is able to consume previously allergenic foods freely and openly. So that means if they're anaphylactic to peanuts, in our system, they will complete a 60 or 75 peanut challenge. Now, they don't have to maintain that high an amount, but it shows you that there's really no cap on the amount of protein that they can consume, and it eliminates that risk. And essentially, this form of immune tolerance, this form of remission, our patients, tag this term as, quote, fruit freedom. But what it really does is it changes their entire dynamic around the disease. So now this is not avoidance. This is absolutely not avoidance. You are actually able to consume, and our patients actually do consume these foods openly like a non-allergic person. Also important to recognize is that there's no daily dosing involved, so you don't have to continue daily dosing when you finish the program. Most of our patients are on weekly, biweekly, or monthly dosing. And in the long term, this process gets better. So if you look at our data out 10, 15 plus years, these patients continue to improve their immune system over time into deep, deep states of remission. So there's some very clear differentials here between what OIT end goals are and, of course, what TIP does. think it's also important to look at the scope of treatment. When we use that term scope of treatment, we're talking about who's a good candidate for these different types of treatment. So in the space of OIT, again, it's dependent on practice, but the survey data that's out there largely shows that OIT has been largely deployed for pediatric patients. So generally young kids, typically up to age 15 to 16 is the majority of patients. You will find some practices that do treat adults, but it's certainly not common. OIT also has pretty stringent criteria, meaning what we call exclusion criteria, meaning if you have these medical problems, that they're likely not going to opt to treat you. And those types of disqualifications include conditions like asthma, meaning moderate to severe asthma. It includes eczema, that's moderate or severe. Also includes conditions like eosinophilic esophagitis or similar types of disorders. And really any number of immune or autoimmune type cases typically will disqualify patients from OIT. In addition, OIT will ask that a patient or family treat one allergen at a time. Now, again, there are some exceptions to that, but again, the vast majority are going to treat one food allergen at a time. And as I mentioned, it's usually either peanut, tree nut, egg, something of that nature. It's a limited scope of allergens. The few groups out there who actually treat multiple allergens simultaneously will often load the immune system with a drug, a biologic called Xolair, and they have to usually use it for 8 weeks on the run-in of OIT, and then they use it for many, many months as they continue. Ultimately, again, the goal is to still get to that point where they reach bite-proof consumption. So again, you compare this scope of treatment to what the Tolerance Induction Program has done from day one. And that is, we essentially are specialized in the complex. We take all comers as far as complexity. We only ask for one thing, and that is they're anaphylactic to foods. Patients come in and they are, having severe asthma, severe eczema, severe EOE, autoimmune conditions. And we've even had patients come here who are post-solid organ transplant. And the reason we're able to manage these cases is because our data science and data modeling allow us to study the immune systems of these individuals and have the appropriate levers to make adjustments so that their course of therapy is tightly controlled, monitored, and again, heavily individualized. That again sets us apart. We also take patients of all ages. So children, teens, up to young adults, so really up to age 30. And early next year, we'll be opening up our 30 to 50-year-old cohort, which I think is an exciting next step in the evolution of what TIP offers. Tolerance Induction Program scope of treatment also makes sure that we treat all food allergens. So that's any food, seeds, grains, atypical allergens like meat-based allergens, as long as there is a definition of the anaphylaxis that's present and we have access to data and of course the immunotherapy model that we have, we will go ahead and treat those patients. So what I always like to describe to potential patients is you will enter the Tolerance Induction Program with a certain number of allergens. You will leave the Tolerance Induction Program when you finish, and you will never develop a new allergy, full stop. Because we are testing for everything, we're controlling for everything, that the chance of you developing a new allergy is essentially zero. And of course, we do treat multiple allergens simultaneously, and we do it without drug. We're not utilizing a biologic. We are treating multiple foods simultaneously based on the mechanics of the program, which offers us really, I think, the speed.
Yeah, but we can talk over it. They can
hear approach, which is critical. So aside from the scope of treatment, it's also important to look at essentially the process or kind of the mechanics of the system. Oral immunotherapy, as I mentioned, has been a build from a type of immunotherapy for the last 100 years. It started in 1999, and it's really been essentially the same model since. It introduces patients to their allergens directly, meaning if you're anaphylactic to peanut, the first thing you're going to get is peanut. The model itself is a dilutional model, meaning that the actual peanut protein is mixed into a dilution. That dilution is given to the child in the medical office for a number of hours. And if they tolerate that dilution, they go home on that. They repeat that cycle every week to 2 weeks as they basically concentrate that dilution down, ultimately getting to, again, about 1 peanut, 2 peanuts, something of that nature. But this is the model. It's a similar model to what occurs in allergy shots and other forms of desensitization. These types of incremental updates, or these kind of incremental occurrences that occur on a week-to-week basis, are the checkpoints for that patient to make sure that if they pass that, hopefully they can make it to the next level and the next level. So that is the mechanics of OIT. TIP, on the other hand, again, is an entirely different form of immunotherapy. So 20 years ago, when I was initially conducting my work of discovery, I utilized my transplant background experience to identify this concept of biosimilar proteins. These are proteins that are related across many different components. That includes evolutionary aspects, biosimilar aspects from protein sequence, and beyond. These critical forms of biosimilar proteins are the key to success in the Tolerance Induction Program. What this means is we're not going to start a patient who's anaphylactic to peanut directly with peanut. We will utilize a pre-treatment and conditioning regimen, and those two regimens will actually utilize biosimilar proteins that we produce for you. And these are really, going down to the microgram and milligram amount, knowing that it retrains the immune system in an effective way. It'll actually lower peanut values effectively. It'll drive the right types of tolerance mechanisms we want to see. So by the time you actually get peanut dosed, we're able to go from a very small amount of peanut to very large amounts of peanuts in a matter of months. And ultimately, what that results is the long-term benefit. The long-term benefit of biosimilar protein immunotherapy is you don't have to do daily dosing. You can actually eat large amounts of these foods like a non-allergic person. And really, ultimately, the body does accept the allergen as non-threatening. That's why they're able to adapt into this form of a lifestyle, if you will, where they're consuming food without restriction. So, when you're kind of looking at these different options, we want to focus not only on how or who is eligible for the program and what the technical mechanics are, but you also want to look at the system itself, meaning how is it conducted as a system? And if you've never been to our facilities, it's really important to understand what has been built here at the Food Allergy Institute and what system actually conducts the Tolerance Induction Program. This is an absolutely unique model in and of itself. We house over 120,000 square feet of space, hundreds of employees across multiple departments to make sure that every child, every patient in our program has the proper 24/7 support and care, completely pushed forward by data and AI to make sure you get from the start to the finish with the least number of symptoms possible, preferably zero symptoms. How do we do this? Well, it starts with our research lab. So our research lab, which is active all the time, is constantly finding new diagnostic tests. Not an easy thing to do, but we have the ability and the strategy to do so. We have a diagnostics lab. So this is a lab where you go and actually get your blood drawn. We house that here within our facilities. We maintain the highest level of accuracy under the highest level of regulation. We have the only level 3 high complexity food allergy laboratory in the world at this stage. And with that comes the volume of patients who come through. So in addition to the research and the diagnostic aspects, we have in-house all of the AI software, machine learning folks in-house actively making our system work and work better. We have a 24/7 escalation command center. These are physicians and team members who are on call 24/7 should anything pop up 365 days a year. That level of support makes sure that should anything happen, even though the vast majority of our patients go through the program without symptoms, they can easily take that individual who's slightly off track and get them right back on track. That type of support, I would argue, is not only rare in this food allergy space, it is basically rare in all of healthcare. And in addition to that, we try to bring to the patient all the things that are critical for a good experience. Top-level customer service, our own in-house billing department to answer questions around billing, our own food manufacturing facility, which produces pharmaceutical-grade production of gummies and tarts and other products to make this process as easy as possible, yet maintaining all the level of accuracy. And then, of course, our amazing large clinical team that includes not only specialists in the allergy immunology space, but specialists across other areas as well that allow anybody with any level of complexity to have their case brought up to us. We're able to manage, make adjustments accordingly, and get them to the finish line of the program. So compare this type of care structure, which again is large and comprehensive, to the care structure of OIT. And so OIT is something that is a bit smaller. When I get to that, I see here you're looking at our time-lapse video here of one of our sites. If you haven't been to our facility, it's important to recognize that this physical space is actually very important for the safety of our patients. When you come in and you're actually getting your food challenges done, you're going to come into a center where all we do is food challenges. We're doing them in over 40 ICU-equipped food challenge rooms. And what that means is it's not that our patients are having any symptoms that require the ICU, but as an ICU specialist, I wanted to make sure that our patients have the highest level of safety possible to make sure that they are having not only a good experience, but should anything happen, we can reverse that reaction full stop in-house. With that said, we've conducted over 56,000 challenges just last year in 2024. And I think that's a reflection of kind of the type of work we do and how serious we are about what we do. Again, compare that to OIT. OIT is done in an allergist office, usually with a number of medical staff. Level of training and so forth, as far as reactions and all that is dependent on that office. As far as at-home support, if there's any symptoms, often the answer is go ahead. If you're having a symptom, deploy your EpiPen, inject yourself with Epi, call 911. So they're utilizing the EMS and the emergency medical system to essentially be their escalation system to save the patient from that initial reaction. That's something that we disagree with. We believe that should be our responsibility, and that's why we built our system our way. But again, in the OIT care structure, it's just simply smaller and doesn't offer the level of depth that we were able to offer. And lastly, it's important to recognize that OIT changes from place to place. The results become highly variable. So if you went from one OIT doctor to another OIT doctor, essentially they cannot simply pick up where you left off and see if we can just carry you forward. That type of non-standardization does make it difficult when somebody has a problem in OIT. So if there's a problem and they have a lot of symptoms, often is the case the patient may be asked to slow way down as far as their dosing or potentially stop dosing altogether, which means that they would no longer continue in that OIT process. So we've talked a lot about, who's a good candidate for different types of patients. We've talked about how the systems are vastly different, but what about like some of the core questions here, the science or the scientific approach? Again, as I mentioned earlier, OIT has been around since 1999. It's built on a model that has been around for about 100 years using direct allergen exposure and then escalation of that exposure to desensitize the body. It is a one-size-fits-all approach, meaning that there is no specific form of OIT for one patient over another. It is simply the same ladder. That's an example that I use for every single patient. So if you're, going for OIT for peanut as an example, they will start you on a certain, set of dilutional drops. If you reach that first ladder, the first rung of the ladder, they'll have you stay on that dilutional dose for a few weeks. They'll bring you back and try it again. If you get to the next ladder, the next rung of the ladder, you go. If you happen to have symptoms, they'll drop you back down, one rung of the ladder, or they'll potentially take you off the ladder, which means you stop dosing altogether. This is the model, but it is not specific to any particular patient. So it is a one-size-fits-all approach. It is also highly variable. As I mentioned, the practices and again, the few survey studies that are done out there, it's hard to understand how they're sourcing their primary food allergen product, meaning are they using actual peanuts? Are they using some sort of flour, powder? What is it that they're doing? And that lack of standardization does make it difficult to understand how this process works from a scientific standpoint. And in addition, there is no data science involved. In fact, the vast majority of OIT practices will do a minimum amount of testing, maybe some skin testing or maybe a little bit of blood testing, but they will essentially just start the patient. If they've had anaphylactic reaction to peanut, again, they'll just start with peanut and move them through the process of OIT. Again, TIP is 100% built on data science. From day one, from the initial build of databases, it has been a data-driven model, which basically means every single person's case is unique. So every single person who undergoes TIP has their own personalized model of care. So their entire sequence of treatment is unique and it matches no one else. We have siblings in the program. And indeed, those patients even have uniquely different models because that is the complexity of this disease state. We also utilize a multi-allergen pathway. That means essentially we're going to apply the pre-treatment conditioning and induction methods so that we can treat multiple foods simultaneously to try and reduce the total duration of treatment as they try to reach remission. We do target the root cause of food allergy, especially for long-term remission. And what that means is for us to be able to drive down these molecular markers, these IgE specific values and such consistently over time means that we have identified that those target cells, we've convinced those target cells to change a lot of their mechanics, and that allows us to make sure that all patients, when they reach that stage, are able to maintain long-term states of remission and, again, free consumption of food. And I also think it's important to remember that we are highly standardized in our approach, meaning that how are we organized and how we utilize data science is through standardization, meaning that how we build AI models and machine learning models is something that we produce on a regular basis. We've actually put out and pushed a lot of that code out in peer review. And ultimately, this is all regulated under institutional review board. What that means is every patient who comes in here signs informed consent, and that means we are held accountable to the highest standards possible to make sure that your child or you yourself get the best care possible. So again, I think some very clear differences here on the scientific approach, especially towards OIT versus TIP. I think it's also important to look at a little more detail on the diagnostic side of things. One of the biggest frustrations that I had when I was first moved into this space was that the actual testing that was out there seemed to be woefully inaccurate. You know, if you were anaphylactic to a food, sometimes your skin tests were positive, sometimes they were negative. Same thing with blood tests, although there was some advancements in blood tests at the time, which I certainly took part of in developing, but it was still never getting to, 90% or high 90% accuracy. And so that is kind of the difference in the system. In OIT, again, there's really very little diagnostics involved. They're not using a set of data to help determine what should be the best path forward. They're using a one-size-fits-all ladder approach that I mentioned. Protocols for OIT have been the same protocols now largely for the last 10 to 15 years. Very little adjustments have been made. Very little research advancement has been made as far as the different OIT protocols that are out there. And this trial and error approach, the idea of, well, we'll try this dose and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we just bring you back down, is a reflection of the same type of method that's been there now for other types of desensitization, which I think, again, not only limits the personalization, it limits the actual endpoint goal of the program. For our program in TIP, it's fully personalized. Like we said, you get a blood draw, you undergo some additional testing, you're going to get 400 plus markers back. Those 400 plus markers are going to actually be put into our AI machine learning system, and it will customize and diagnose which foods are anaphylactic, which foods are sensitized, which foods are tolerant. That diagnostic approach is, as far as accuracy, is in the mid to high 90% range. Again, that's been also published in peer review. I think that is where the applied math model and the diversity of testing that's necessary kind of puts us in a good position to make sure that we have the right diagnosis and that we can use that same data to design the actual therapeutic process for your patient. So in addition to like the diagnostic side and of course the therapeutic side, you have to look at the duration of treatment, right? Because I think if you look at duration, both programs take some time. I mean, it is not easy to convince an immune system to change the way it's functioning. In the world of OIT, you're typically looking at 12 to 18 months total treatment for the single food allergen. Again, this is based on survey data that was published. 12 to 18 months for total treatment for those who actually complete the program. It does require daily dosing for life. Again, so whatever small amount of protein is consumed, they stay on that protein on a daily basis indefinitely. Stopping treatment often leads to relapse. So if you look at the pharmaceutical data from Palforzia and its measurements out through 4 years, it's pretty clear that when stopping that particular treatment, there's actually a risk of relapse that is very significant. How many days can you go stopping is not very clear, but it's consistently been a problem. And I think also important to remember is that the duration of treatment also in OIT requires a rest period. What that means is, when you're doing your treatment dose on a daily basis, you essentially have to refrain from activity. So 2 hours of rest on average per day indefinitely, which you can imagine becomes difficult from a ability to be compliant. And I think that's why the compliance numbers reflect the difficulty long term. Again, compare that to TIP, where our range of treatment is around 2.5 to 4.5 years, keeping in mind that this is to treat not one food allergen, but all food allergens. So the range is present because we have patients who are anaphylactic to just 3 or 4 foods, and we have patients who are anaphylactic to 9 to 12 foods or even more than that. So we're able to kind of add an additive fashion, bring all that together and complete most patients within this period of time. It's also important that understand that when patients complete TIP, it is a long-lasting form of remission, right? We're not seeing the relapse, the drop-off, things of that nature. It's confirmed with annual testing. So we use the same data science model to make sure that your child or you yourself are doing well. And that long-lasting remission is something we can say confidently now is going up to 15 to 20 years. Remission for us, though, is different because it does not require daily dosing. We're getting our patients to weekly, biweekly, or monthly dosing, which is much more achievable. And frankly, to our perspective, from patients' perspective, almost enjoyable, right? Something that you can look forward to consuming on a weekly, biweekly, or monthly basis. And also critical is that once our patients achieve remission, there is no daily rest period at all. So these patients are essentially, doing normal activities. They consume their maintenance, once a week or once a month, and they can certainly be active during that time. It's no problem at all. So again, some pretty significant differences between TIP and OIT when it comes to duration and approach to therapy. A few more points towards safety and side effects. Again, this is pulled on OIT from survey data as well as literature that has been published in OIT. Risks of reactions. This is primarily GI reactions, meaning abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, very common, 70 to 90% in a lot of the studies. And often, for the patients who are having symptoms, they often have to end up on additional medication if they're to continue. That's typically biologics like Xolair. Actual total number EpiPen use is anywhere between 5 and 35% on the literature. But again, in the more pharmaceutical-based studies, the number tends to go up a bit rather than the reported studies that are done from surveys and recall-based data. The Tolerance Induction Program, we're most proud of our ability to take patients from start to finish without symptoms. Right now, that number stands at around 85%. 85% of patients will go start to finish to remission without reporting any symptom into our program. We have the lowest risk of severe reactions, again, less than 1% reaction rate. Most patients in the 15% who do have some symptoms, it's a one-time symptom, often isolated to itch, some sort of type of a itch type phenomenon, or they're in a situation where they're having some mild respiratory or GI symptoms. These last one time as we put the patient back on track utilizing our data science, and ultimately these patients are able to achieve remission. It avoids medications like Xolair unless absolutely necessary. We do have a very small number of patients on Xolair, but for all intents and purposes, that number is essentially nil. And our EpiPen reaction rate is something we publish online. So I think, again, we are very transparent on what we do. And so under regulation, we actually put that data online. And EpiPen use, again, for treatment-related side effects is a small number per month. It's typically, you can count it on one hand, if that. So again, pretty big difference between safety and side effects between TIP and OIT. Last, kind of focus on scientific innovation and kind of the mechanism. As I mentioned, OIT is based on desensitization methods that have been around for a long time, which means that we're not trying to change it in a significant fashion, which means that we're going to achieve the same effect, most times. What that means is we're limiting the impact on deeper immune changes. I think there's some idea in other countries that maybe they should change the way OIT is done and see if they can induce some levels of tolerance. But again, it's very, very minimum. And really OIT, because it's not organized in a way to conduct research, it often means that it's been done in a non-standardized way. And ultimately, the science is not there to kind of study it because the system is largely separated from the actual scientific world, which means identifying the root molecular cause becomes very difficult. As I mentioned, the Tolerance Induction Program houses this large care model, which includes R&D, AI, machine learning, where we can actually study the mechanics of this disease, meaning food anaphylaxis, and how targeted retraining of that immune system can lead to deep tolerance and deep remission. And we study those values on a regular basis, both in the laboratory and across the digital spectrum. We know and understand how we can modify antibody targets and their specific values. We're able to lower these patients down from peanut values of 100 down to single digit and eventually close to zero values over a few years of time. We're able to identify what tolerance mechanisms are in place and use applied math to take that approach and actually give it to so many patients so that we know when they're hitting certain states of tolerance that we can move their maintenance dosing to every 2 weeks and 4 weeks, which makes life, again, that much easier and that much better. We're also able to track the immune response over time so that every patient can really know, how am I doing in this program? Am I getting better? Am I in the middle of the road getting better? I'm an outlier that's doing extremely well, or am I somebody who's maybe a little slower than everyone else? And we'll share that data with you as you go through the program. And again, fundamentally, we are continuously studying the mechanism here, which is critical because our goal is to achieve tolerance. And as we achieve tolerance and deep remission, the application of that science to other diseases is something that's, I think, going to be very critical. Clinical outcomes, I think, are probably one of the most important questions that everyone's going to ask. Again, based on the literature out there and the studies, OIT has desensitization rates of 60 to 80%. That means short term. So in the 12 to 18 month time frame of a study, about 60 to 80% of patients will achieve their bite-proof state. However, few achieve long-lasting tolerance. Again, very, very few studies have been conducted on this in the OIT space, and the results of achieving tolerance are very low. Many patients do drop out over time. Again, the larger studies that have been done, which again, I'd argue, even though they're large, they're not even close to the numbers of patients who are in our studies. You're looking at a 50% dropout at 3 years because it is difficult to maintain it. And patients continue to have reactions, even though they're in the later stages of OIT treatment. And of course, the clinical outcome is strict avoidance is still required. And again, I contrast that with TIP, where 99% of our patients do reach remission, or what we call sustained unresponsiveness in the scientific world. To patients, they call it food freedom, where they're not conducting daily dosing. They're at weekly, biweekly, or monthly dosing. They're safe to now eat dozens of previously allergic foods like a non-allergic patient, which is just phenomenal. And then, of course, remission is confirmed on a regular basis. We don't let go of you once you're done, right? We're going to keep an eye, make sure those first 5 years are going really well. And we test that based on that same data analytics, AI, machine learning model to make sure that you're going to have a lifetime of remission ahead of you. A couple last points on kind of day-to-day activities. So appointments, it's important to recognize the difference there. With OIT, these are in-person appointments in the doctor's office. That's usually done weekly or biweekly. So that is, again, once a week or every 2 weeks. But you have to go in and you're in the office for 4 to 6 hours. So for 4 to 6 hours, you or your child receive the drops, and they're waiting to see if you can handle or tolerate those drops or if you have any symptoms. And then the decision is made to go home on that dose for about a week or so. And then you continue that process in OIT for 12 to 18 months. In TIP, 90% or more of this program is actually done at home. So we have patients from all around the world. We have well over 1,000 patients who travel here globally. And these patients are doing their treatment at home just like everyone else. They return to our center 4 to 6 times a year. When they come to our center, we're going to challenge them and actually conduct those challenges to clear those foods. So now they actually can open them up into their diet, which is, I think, just phenomenal. And of course, as you kind of saw in that time-lapse video, one thing we do that no one else does is exercise stress test all of our patients after a challenge. Why do we do that? We actually put them through an exercise stress test because we want to assure that under the highest amount of stress, they're having no clinical symptoms. We want that risk to be on us. We want to manage that in our facility to make sure you're safe so that when you go home, you have no symptoms and you're essentially good to go. As far as patient support, I think, again, there's some pretty significant differences. Oral immunotherapy largely has in-clinic support, so you get the support while you're there. But after hours, if you have a complex case, if you have multiple specialists involved, It's just, again, not the bandwidth of the typical OIT practice. However, TIP provides a tremendous amount of patient support. First, we have a pharmaceutical grade food laboratory that provides precision gummy dosing, so gelatins and tarts. 28 different allergens have now been produced in our gummy and tart format, and those are currently been deployed to all of our patients. We have customer service available on a regular basis, 24/7, 365 on-call command center for any medical needs that are present. We also make sure we take any complex cases and escalate those patients through our command center so patients get responses and answers to next steps within a matter of hours. So we're not delaying, the approach to get your child right back on track, and I think that's something our patients really are appreciative of. We also offer customized emergency plans. These emergency plans are specific to your child so that if there's ever a symptom, whether it's through our program or through an accidental exposure, which is actually more common, they can actually control that very quickly, let us know what's going on, and again, get the patient stabilized right away. And that means we have a lot of parents who have seen what has happened with their kids as far as going from anaphylaxis to a state of remission and all the tremendous benefits they've received. They've offered to volunteers. We have a large volunteer community, and something that we offer to all of our patients who are coming into the program, which is great because they can share stories and experiences and understand how they can get to the endpoint of the Tolerance Induction Program in as positive experience as possible. And then lastly, our expert care team, I think, is critical. We have multidisciplinary collaboration so that if you need a specific kind of specialist, a GI doctor, or anybody else, we can actually manage those things pretty effectively. So I think, again, in summary, if you kind of compare TIP versus OIT, OIT does offer a short-term safety net in the period of time that it's offered if you're able to make it through the therapy process. It offers bite-proof protection, but again, not tolerance. And so there's really no true freedom. It is still a version of avoidance. There are no national standards towards OIT or even international standards. Every physician is going to conduct it uniquely and differently. That makes it difficult, to really understand what these outcomes look like. And then the rate of side effects, as noted, and the long-term dropout rate is as noted, and on the high side, which again I think is reflective of why it is difficult to maintain OIT long-term across those studies. TIP targets a root cause of food allergies for a lifetime of remission. That again is from the cell science to the human to the AI side of things. Standardized, regulated, and data-driven, and that's something we've done from day one, and we will continue to do moving forward. We offer safe, multi-allergen treatment with an extremely low side effect profile. So we're able to treat patients as fast as possible across all of their allergens and do this at the lowest adverse event rate possible. And of course, we are going to continue to do, as I've said from the beginning, research and innovation to keep improving these outcomes. We will not stop until we have, potentially a 0% adverse event rate. That's something that I will continue to do as long as I'm here at the helm of this organization. So as I kind of mentioned at the start of this discussion today, and we'll go into questions and answers here shortly. The term that I wanted to understand when I started this journey 20 years ago was solution. What is a solution to this problem? And solution means that you are not just minimizing a degree of risk. Avoidance is a way to live. You can do that. You can try to avoid foods, but the risk is still present at a significant number. You have about a 30% anaphylactic reaction if you live in avoidance based on studies, 30% per year. Biologics like Xolair, FDA approved last year for food allergy, again, is not a solution. It doesn't offer actual therapeutic effect. It's simply giving a risk reduction. But unfortunately, 35% of the time, it doesn't work towards risk reduction, and it doesn't do so across all foods, and it wasn't studied across all foods in the same robust manner. So, how is that perceived as a solution? And then, of course, OIT. OIT is still a form of avoidance. And so ultimately, if it's a solution, it has to offer a patient a situation where they're as close to a cure as possible. In their mind, they should be able to consume food like a non-allergic person. They should be able to stay in remission without any significant risk of relapse. And over time, the immune system should achieve the end goal of being in such a deep state of remission that they no longer require the need of an EpiPen. And these are the areas we're targeting and focusing on. And I think this is what allows us to really state that TIP is the standard of care. It is the solution when it comes to food anaphylaxis. So with that said, we'd like to play a quick video of some of our patients who are in remission, and then we'll...
How long have you been in remission for?
2 weeks.
I think 4 years.
Well, I finished it last year when I was 9, so that's 4 years.
I've been in remission for 6 years.
6 years.
I've been in remission since around August of last year. So this is about my first year of remission.
What's your favorite food now?
Definitely Reese's peanut butter cups. Donuts.
Pizza, definitely, hands down.
Almost everything.
Almost
honestly.
everything?
Most of my favorite foods I wasn't able to eat before. Cake, donuts, cupcakes.
What does food freedom mean to you?
It means that I'm able to eat whatever I want, whenever I want it, and it's so important to me because all of my favorite snacks I wouldn't be able to eat today, and all of my favorite foods, I couldn't eat them, so I can eat things without checking.
Food freedom means to me everything, that I do no longer have to worry about his safety, that he can eat whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and he's independent, and we are good to go. Spontaneous life.
This play changed my life a lot. Like, I used to never be able to eat certain stuff, but now I can, and I'm really thankful for the people who helped me get to where I am now.
So again, just a few of our patients at one of our remission events telling you their stories. I do want to answer a couple quick questions before we go into the live Q&A. We'll have about an hour as far as live Q&A. One of the submitted questions was, can we treat patients who have failed OIT? The answer is absolutely yes. We do this on a regular basis. To be very frank, when I first built this program, it was built on models of patients who were, what I call treatment naive. They had not received, food challenges or OIT or anything of the sort, because it predates, some of those approaches. As we started to see patients come in who actually received some form of treatment and they failed, you can imagine that it does change the immune system landscape, and we had to build the data models around it to make it work. I think we've done a great job with these patients who come in and have not done well with OIT. We can still get them to the finish line, but it is something that we do take, I think, particularly unique care and angle on because their immune system is not naive to those food proteins. Another question is, how does TIP differ from additional treatments like, say, Xolair? I think I mentioned that here a few minutes back. Again, Xolair is a biologic. It is injectable. So this is a drug that has been around really for 25 years. For indications mainly around asthma. It has been studied in the food allergy space, but it is not a food allergy treatment. Again, it's something that provides a level of risk mitigation, essentially a cushion for patients. So if you inject with Xolair, it takes about 16 weeks, and then you have some degree of protection for certain foods. Again, it's about a 65% efficacy rate, meaning there's a good portion of patients who don't get the benefit. And Xolair is also a form of avoidance because, if you take Xolair, you still have to avoid the foods. You cannot eat those foods that you're allergic to, and you have to have the same level of precautions as far as, risk of anaphylaxis. How are food challenges different from the way the allergist does it? Again, I think, just at a fundamental level, our food challenges are conducted in the highest safety approach possible. We have all of our rooms with full cardiac, respiratory, and clinically trained staff. We also do food challenges that are followed by exercise stress testing, which is critical because that really eliminates or highly reduces the risk of reactions for that food as you go home. And in addition, I think just the data modeling and data science of how we prep and get ready for those food challenges is uniquely different. I can't stress enough, having standardization is useful. You want to know that if your child is anaphylactic to walnuts, they should consume an 18-gram challenge at this point in time and maintain a certain amount of food in order to maintain that level of remission. That kind of data modeling is often not the case in the typical allergist office. They're choosing relatively random amounts of food to challenge and are unclear on what maintenance should technically look like. So with that said, we're going to switch to our live Q&A. And just a little bit of housekeeping rules. What we usually like to do here is ask you to raise your hand I will unmute you, and then you go. Feel free to ask your question, and we'll kind of move on to the next person. Given we do have about an hour here, I'd ask you if you can just ask one question. Just so it gives enough time for others to go ahead and ask their questions. So we'll start off with Tia. If you want to go and tell us, unmute, maybe tell us where you're from, how you heard about the program, and ask your question.
Yes. Hi, my name's Tia. I actually asked a question before at the QA. We just joined your program and launching in August. We're from Maryland. My son has multiple food allergies, anaphylactic to a few, and we tried OIT and he did not do well because of the eczema. And the traditional way, the doctor, our previous allergist, sent us home, say, hey, try a quarter teaspoon sunflower seed butter since he can't do nuts. And that sent us to the emergency room. And then he also tried a little bit of sesame, which also didn't work well, and vomiting. So I think my question is, during the treatment, how is the reaction like as he tries different types of food, or as he gradually start to taking his allergen? I think probably to a lot of parents with kids with food allergy, it's the reaction that kind of worries us, maybe even quit OIT. So how does it look within the program?
No, thank you for the question, and I'm sorry, you had that experience. It is a common story that we hear, unfortunately, because to be frank, the issue with OIT is that it's a blind form of desensitization. They're not using any sort of data science to say, okay, if a child has a certain type of response to a set of foods, what risk does it really put them at? So when you come out here, you're going to see very clearly how we do things differently. And that type of data science is going to make sure that your son doesn't actually get, the wrong protein at the wrong time. As we go through pre-treatment and conditioning, you'll see that he starts to clear foods, and you'll be shocked and amazed that, like, wow, you said yourself, he had sesame and he had anaphylaxis. Probably, I'll just put a time frame out there, like say 6 or 8 months into the program, he's consuming sesame without symptoms. That goes back to our kind of core fundamentals of our type of immunotherapy, the biosimilar model, and the data science that goes into it. We actually build every patient's program as far as its pathway to stay under the radar of reactivity. Are we perfect? No, I wish we were perfect, but we're pretty good. We're really, really quite good. And most of the time, reactions happen due to a compilation of factors. So sometimes a child is sick, and a parent kind of, doses too many days while they're sick, even though that's something we don't recommend. Things like that kind of often push them over the edge.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. So I completely understand that it's still possible too, because the child has food allergies. So what you mean is that it's a lot less likely. And if it does happen, there are few factors that we can mitigate. Did I understand it right? Okay.
Absolutely. And we have a 24/7 team on call to support this, right? So should anything happen, we're going to immediately, get on the case and make an appropriate number of adjustments. I can tell you that, we take care of very, very complicated cases. Even with those complex cases, they have a very high success rate when they don't have very many symptoms. So I think, again, we have a very good tactical approach here that gets patients, further along in the program.
Got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Next up is Heather.
Hello, my name's Heather. I'm based in Palo Alto, California. I have an almost 6-month-old that was just diagnosed with peanut allergies and egg allergies, we believe. And so my question is, being so young, obviously we want to start him on the program as soon as possible when he turns 18 months, but is there a chance he might outgrow it? I guess, do you recommend starting as early as possible, or do you recommend waiting a little bit in kids that are really young?
That's a great question. From a data standpoint, the question you're asking is around the concept of what we call persistent allergy, right? Meaning, like, can it, go down in time, or is it going to always be persistent? And I wish I could give you really good, data-based answers on these things. Unfortunately, studies from the 1990s are often quoted where they'll say things like, 80% of kids with egg allergy are going to outgrow their allergy. They'll say things like 65% of patients with milk anaphylaxis will outgrow their milk allergy by 5 years of age. More recent data, from the US and outside the US starts to show that that's probably not accurate. And in fact, patients are developing more persistent allergy now than was assumed previously. The short answer is yes, there's always a percentage chance that a patient's immune system can develop natural tolerance. But that chance is really, even across the board, not a high number. It's a low number, and especially things like peanut, they tend to be fixed. And the chance of that number going down is certainly well under 10%. As far as starting early, it's something we do all the time. We have many patients who start children at a young age. We have the same efficacy and same success rate across all age groups, so that's not the concern. And I just say one thing about starting with a young child is that there are some benefits, and that if they can, start TIP and finish TIP before they're, 4 years of age or so, they have no recall of ever being anaphylactic. They don't remember anything, so you've essentially removed that, from their neural memory. And I think that's a great thing because as they become older, they eat foods like a non-allergic person. They don't have any of the stigma and any of the concerns on both sides that are present when you're older and you have food anaphylaxis.
Got it.
So that answers your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next is Lale. How are you? If you can go ahead and unmute, please. Right. Maybe we'll go and skip here to the next person, come back to you. Go ahead, Morgan. Can you go ahead and unmute, please?
Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm from Washington State. My 20-month-old has allergies to peanut, egg, and some tree nuts. He has very elevated IgE levels. His allergist seems to think that they're the highest he's seen. We're very interested in the program. We just have a lot of life changes coming up with my husband getting out of the military and everything. We had an appointment last week with our allergist who said that our son is very likely, pretty much guaranteed to develop asthma because of his high IgE levels. And so I'm curious if we were to start the program and what you've seen in the past, as the children develop tolerance for these food allergies that they have, do you see improvement in asthma if they have that already? Does it, prevent it from being onset, and also as well as eczema? He has mild eczema too. So I guess those are my two questions.
No, thank you. That's a great set of questions. These conditions, these medical conditions, food allergies, asthma, hay fever, sinus disease, eczema, and even EOE, kind of gut-based allergy, they are all tied together, right? They have similar functions and triggers. You mentioned IgE, that's one of the molecules, but there's many, many more even as well. I always said when I first started this work that we have only one job, and that is, as we take an oath, we first do no harm, right? And we have to make sure that whatever we're doing for our patients, we are driving down these molecular markers in the right direction. And as we do that, we will make sure that they're clinically able to consume these foods, without restriction. What we've noted here over 20 years of time is that we have to also then look at the whole other systems. So, again, in older children, we'll actually check lung function on every single patient. We will check inflammatory airway markers. We'll also, look at their skin and make sure that we're identifying any sort of risk factors there. And of course, we're going to monitor their weight and their nutritional side to make sure their GI tract is okay. So we're really comprehensively managing these patients. And I'd say the good news is, again, we're multidisciplinary. We're going to manage the total package. When our patients are done, and this is a regular story, they start the program, they have food allergies, bad eczema, and they even have asthma at that stage. When they finish the program, their eczema is almost completely controlled. Asthma, they're usually on much lower medication, if not off medication. And of course, they're consuming foods like a non-allergic person. So, it's a pretty dramatic difference on how things operate.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right, next up is Brooke. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Brooke from Colorado. I have a 14-year-old that has been with you for almost 6 years and a 6-year-old who has successfully completed OIT and eats about 20 peanuts a day. So my question is, what would it look like for my OIT kid to come to TIP?
Okay, that's a specific question. Number one, we still have to run the data science. That's an important thing to do. As I mentioned, in the last probably 5 to 7 years, somewhere around 10 to 15% of our patients have had some OIT treatment. Now, I'd say the vast majority are what we call failures, so they had bad reactions and so forth. Sounds like you've had a better experience and achieved some amount of peanut exposure. We then would repeat, kind of our diagnostics and say, all right, how does this shift in the immune system occur? A couple things. Importantly, we want to make sure that it has not triggered the development of other allergens. And that's a very important, kind of way to look at things. But the short answer to your question is we'd still take that diagnostic data, come up with probably a relatively short course of treatments, and we want that individual to achieve food freedom and be able to move their dosing cycles to every week, 2 weeks, and once a month.
Yeah, that would be the ultimate goal of why we'd want to do it. So then there'd be potential for her program to be less than 2 years, maybe.
Oh, yes. Actually, we have a lot of patients who are on like 6-month type programs. And again, without knowing the details of your case, I'd say, these are the kind of cases that we typically see.
Okay, awesome. So not overkill to come to you.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Great question. Thank you. All right, we're going to try Lale one more time here. If you can unmute.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Lale and I'm from California in Los Angeles. And my son is 13-year-old. He has severe anaphylactic reaction to lots of nuts, tree nuts, peanuts, and also kiwi from fruits. He has also lots of environmental allergy that developed after any reaction, any accident that he had. And he has asthma as well. They are all comes after lots of accidents that we have. And I just enrolled in the program. I'm wondering if we can be successful in treating his asthma and environmental allergy as well. And how long does it take for him to be like free to take any food that he wants? Because he had used EpiPen, he went to ER rooms many times, and this is like really life-threatening for him.
Yeah. Again, I'm sorry, that he's had such difficult course in avoidance. If you look at any given month when we have patients enroll into our program, and we're bringing in, somewhere around, 100 plus patients a month on average, about 60% of them are going to have your story.
Mm-hmm.
They have a child who's had significant number of reactions, multiple EpiPens, and some of them have very severe reactions where they end up in the hospital, the ICU, or they needed 3 EPIs, things of that nature.
Yes.
So again, it's important to recognize that, my background as somebody who has, the ICU and pulmonary training, we're going to take those cases very seriously. We're going to actually study them even more deeply and understand, are there any other factors that make him like that? Is there a problem, with his immune cells? Is there a problem with his histamine release? Is there a problem with different things like that? So we'll make sure all of that deep dive is complete before we ever start treatment. So I have no concerns about, what you just mentioned as far as a case. It is literally what we do on a regular basis.
Okay, awesome. Looking forward to our first onboarding sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next up here, I'm just going to ask you to unmute. I think your screen name is maybe not accurate.
Hi, yeah, it's definitely not accurate. This is Juliet Drohan, with my daughter Mila here. She has an allergy to cashew and pistachio. We've seen an allergist who's recommending she starts OIT. She's only 9 months old, so she can't start CIP, my understanding is, until 18 months. Our question is, would it be a hindrance or would it potentially help for her to start OIT just so she has some, I know it will be a small amount, but just some protection in the interim?
That's a great question. I mean, 18 months, a lot of it is just around 18 months. We need to know that the child is going to be old enough to consume foods, on a more regular basis. But aside from that point, it's important to remember what the immune system is doing at the young age of your daughter, right? there's a lot of activity happening in the immune system. So 12 months of age, 15 months of age, 18 months of age, there's critical milestones of how immune cells are developing and how they're learning. Certainly you could try OIT, right? So you attempt the blind desensitization, but I'll tell you that the literature out there shows, and this has been the case in this whole world of early food introduction, which started about 7-8 years ago, where they're trying to actively encourage people to give their kids peanuts at a young age. And while many of those patients, not all of them, many of them could actually then consume peanut, it increased their chance of developing other food allergens. So now all of a sudden you had a much larger increased risk of developing tree nut allergy, or much larger increased risk of developing a seed allergy, things of that nature. So my only concern in her case is right now, maybe she's only anaphylactic to cashews and pistachios, but you start dosing her up and you might see her range of risk shift. And then all of a sudden now you're dealing with 3 or 4 other allergens versus, again, our approach where we go ahead and know upfront what we're dealing with. We actually load on all critical biosimilar proteins, and then hopefully all she has is a cashew pistachio allergy, and then that can be wrapped up in a number of months.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Next is Kristen.
Hi there.
Hello.
Okay, so I have a 13-year-old and we've been doing SLIT at Allergy Associates of La Crosse for 13 years. We live in Minnesota and he had about 50 food allergies when he was age 5. Now we're down to sesame, shellfish, and coconut. And we do food challenges through this office and he's had about 16 so far. But when we went to do one of his more severe allergens in May, he ended up having an anaphylactic reaction. So that made me start looking more into this program instead. My only real hesitation is the fact that he would have to be on an antihistamine throughout the program. Can you speak to that at all? I'm concerned about what an antihistamine could do to his gut microbiome. And new studies are saying that it could potentially cause dementia long term. Like, I don't want to suppress the immune system, so then it creates other different issues later.
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. So yes, the only, again, I think that the program, Tolerance Induction Program, is really a non-medical based program, right? We're using all biosimilar proteins. These are all native natural proteins. That is the key core effect of the program. We do ask patients to stay on a low dose antihistamine. That's a very important point for one particular reason, and that is we want to control histamine cycles. Histamine is something that your body will naturally produce in many circumstances. You're exercising, your histamine level goes up. You have a cold, your histamine level goes up. You are emotionally, laughing or crying, your histamine levels go up. And when patients stay on a very low dose of antihistamine, which by the way is not active when we do our food challenges, right? So this is really just
Okay.
during the day-to-day dosing that occurs. The benefit of it is very simple. It eliminates the question mark that parents may have, right? So they'll see, they do a dose and they see some redness or they see a little bit of flushing and they're like, oh, is that food? Is it a natural histamine response? And so forth. So around 18 years ago, I started that model up and it's worked very well ever since. Antihistamines have been around for basically 100 years and one of the oldest drugs known to man. So I think it's a very predictable set of medications. To your question about like gut microbiome, there's really no evidence that it's going to change anything in the gut microbiome. It doesn't, dabble in those pathways. And the most recent study that you're discussing around dementia risk was those are difficult studies to look at because these large population studies will also say that if you consume too much Tylenol, you have an increased risk of dementia. And so, the population dynamics are complex. I'm a fan of no medication, right? Like if we can get, and so our patients, if they're on it just for the time that they're in the program to get to remission. At that stage, we stop the antihistamine, right? So it's a short-term approach that I think at low dose does not serve any major risk to the patient.
Okay. And it sounds like this would be a good transition from SLIT to your program.
You know, I
Like
didn't mention.
we've done it for 10 years, so I would hope he has built up some tolerance to certain foods. He can eat some of them freely and other ones we're dosing daily and every other day, the actual foods.
Yeah. Well, I would say let the data tell us, you know, what the results look like. We've had many patients who've gone the lacrosse route and come this way. I can't make any general comments on that. I mean, I think it has, you know, it does trigger some amount of, you know, quote protection, but it's really hard for us to kind of analyze that. We have a totally different approach, and our approach again is to get them to be in a free consumption route, and the difference between, you know, really picograms of protein of what's in slit versus, you know, grams of protein in what we do is just, it's pretty large.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for your questions. Next question is Michelle. Hi. Michelle, can you go ahead and unmute, please? Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back to you. Next is Yubo.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi,
Yes.
good afternoon. I'm from Connecticut. My daughter is 16 years old. She has both all peanut and all tree nuts, and then environmental. And for treatment, since she was infant, we're being food avoidance, using food avoidance. And then when she was in elementary school, we did OIT. But after the OIT program, she couldn't eat one peanut M&M for one every day because that still caused her like a tummy ache and have just not feeling well, asthma. So kind of like stop that and still going back to the avoidance. And now she's 16 years old, and she has outgrown her asthma and only need inhaler in the winter month a few times a year. And now we're looking forward to start the tip because we tried OIT. It's very time consuming and then still didn't achieve the result. Also, since she has environmental allergies to trees and she is allergic to like avocado, not to life threatening, but have lip swelling and then other stone fruits. Since we have a dog, we live with the dog allergens. We also do allergy shot. She did allergy shot for 8 months or close to a year, but other priority took over. We kind of stopped. She felt some sense of release this spring with the seasonal allergies, and we want to restart the allergy shot. But I also want to start the tip program. In this case, how do we blend in the environmental dog allergy with the food allergy? What goes first, and or can be happen in the same period?
No, it's a great question, and you know, I think much of your story you just described reflects what I just presented. You know, and it is difficult because, to your point, all food allergy patients are uniquely different, right? Some of them have a significant amount of environmental factors. Some have none at all. And so, you know, we look at each of these groups of patients differently from our mathematical standpoint as well. The short answer to your question is we take full advantage of studying the entire immune system. So she has a number of environmental allergens. We're going to look at that very deeply and understand which of them are causing lung problems, which of them are related to dog, which of them are related to peanut and tree nut, and which of them are causing this swelling with avocado. And so we're able to isolate all those things, and the treatment happens simultaneously. So we, you know, whether use allergy shots or potentially use our form of sublingual spray, which is again very specific to our program and our patients have a lot of benefit for that process. So not only will she clear out the foods, her environmental allergies will get better, and ultimately she'll be able to consume foods like the avocado, and we'll get past the what's called FPAS, or the food pollen allergy syndrome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next up is Amina.
Hi, my name is Amina. We're from Kansas City. We have 2 kiddos in your program. We just started TIP a month ago. My son, who's 17, he has a question for you.
Hello. So, as she mentioned, I'm 17. I'm working on peanuts, tree nuts, and sesame, and I started TIP a month ago. I also started SLIT 2 weeks ago as part of TIP, and I have some seasonal and environmental allergies. So my question is, I have exercise-induced rhinitis. So I do taekwondo, so if I'm like sparring or like doing any high heart rate activity, then my nose starts running, which is really like inconvenient. So will tip and slit help me with that?
That's a very specific and interesting question. I'd say, I would argue, I mean, the concept of exercise-induced rhinitis, it's a known phenomenon. It is not common. And I'd almost argue, I wonder if it's purely exercise, or I wonder if it's food or pollen related. Often it's usually something else. There's different types of vasomotor phenomenon that can actually trigger exercise-affiliated symptoms as far as nasal symptoms and congestion. I would first want to answer that question before we say it's tied to the, foods or pollen. If it is tied to food and pollen, certainly what we're doing will help. But I think if it's potentially not, I'd bring that up as a question. And honestly, you should bring that up as a question to our team here when you come back. We're happy to escalate it and see how we can help.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Morgan.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm located outside of Pittsburgh, and I wanted to see if you could speak to any potential expansion to somewhere on the East Coast or outside of California, and if it's something you're considering, do you have a timeline for that possibly happening?
Yeah, it's, a common question I got asked. We are opening a San Francisco Bay Area site here in just a few weeks and in early August. And so, our patients have been waiting for a long time. We're making it up there and building it the right way for maximum safety and efficacy. We'll study how that process works because it is a uniquely, I shouldn't say uniquely, it's a slightly different model as far as it's the same team, it's the same process of what we do, but the organization of it is slightly different. We want to see how that works. I think if we see that activity pick up substantially, certainly next year, we'd like to move east. I can't tell you it's going to necessarily be on the East Coast, but we'll start that process of marching our way out there. I'd say largely just look at our growth, let more people know about us. The more information that's out there, the more we can actually start to accommodate the needs of all the folks. I do tell folks, look, I know it's a flight to get out here, but the folks in San Francisco have been flying here for a bit. They're going to now finish their program close to home. It's always a good idea to start early, get the process moving, and then obviously we remain committed to kind of expand and get out closer to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next is Shri. All right.
Hi, doctor. My son is now 13 years and he has milk, nuts, and egg allergies. We really didn't try anything. Like we were given a choice before, like the desensitization process, and we rejected because we thought that like he has a childhood asthma, he has a really bad asthma, and we need to use a lot of albuterol or any other thing. It might stunt his growth. But I have a question like regarding the biosimilar protein and immune system response. So in the IgE values, when we see the milk protein or the egg or coconut, for example, the values show very high, whereas in the real life, he can eat coconut, but the values show that he has the value is high. How do we select a biosimilar protein? Once we start the program, does he get like more wheezing, and do we need, does he need to take more albuterol? Will he prone to more wheezing?
Right. I think just to summarize your question, you're concerned about an underlying, sounds like
Conditions, pre-existing conditions coming out, use of more albuterol or anything that stunts the growth, the stress we are causing to the immune system by inducing a biosimilar protein into the system, stunting the growth of the children. That is what my worry is.
As I mentioned, we are voluntarily under regulation, and I could tell you that if we were doing anything that was stunting the growth of our patients, we would no longer be doing this type of work. So, our work does not result in, reduce height velocity. It does not affect their weight. In fact, it's the opposite. Our patients actually tend to become more nutritionally sound. As far as your specific questions around, being able to consume some foods and still have values of 100, it's a very complicated point you're bringing up. And I would say this, that, if a patient is able to safely consume a food, right, in large amounts, we're talking large amounts, which has to be understood as far as a total amount of grams of protein, then there's no reason their value should still be 100, right? And that's what goes back to these biosimilar models. If he's able to consume coconut, there must be a biosimilar that's still present as far as an anaphylactic range protein that's drawing his values on the high side. So that's why we use AI, machine learning, and so forth to identify that information. Again, 400 plus molecular markers. And in addition, we do take a very deep inventory of your food history. What is it that you consume? How often are you consuming it? And we're dialing that into grams of protein. So all of that information together allows us to go and create a model of care, even for a complicated patient.
So you are saying that we would be able to detect for my son a biosimilar model because his IgE of milk is very high. His IgE of nuts are very high. IgE of egg yellow is high, but he is able to eat Krispy Kreme donuts, original glazed, and able to eat coconut is very high, but he's able to eat coconut chutney. So
yeah. Again, the short answer to your question is yes, but we also have to understand what his long-term risk is with the current type of proteins that he's consuming. What we want to do is make sure he's able to consume all foods, right? I mean, all foods, and not only consume those foods openly without risk, we have to drop those numbers down. It is not safe to have values of 100 to different allergens that we know that is going to produce risk in the long term. So our job, especially for very complicated cases like this, is we, again, take it to a multidisciplinary approach. We have all types of specialists, including lung specialists available, and we try to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction.
So in that regard, one more question. So do we test the blood and the skin at the same time in order to mark a biosimilar protein, or we just go for the blood test and we draw the biosimilar protein and from there we go on in your lab?
So we do blood testing, skin testing, patch testing, and other tests. It is a large number of analytes that are done basically across a couple of visits. That is the data that's fed into our system.
Got that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, next up is Erin. Hi, Erin.
Hi, can you hear me?
We're good.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm Erin. I'm from North Carolina. So first, can I just say thank you, because this is really encouraging and uplifting, and you're making a huge difference for many of us who live with it ourselves and our families. But I have a 4-year-old with many allergies. He's already in your program, and I can't begin to express how thrilled we are that he's in your program. But my question today is not about his case. It's actually about his brother, who's 3. He has one allergy of which we're aware. But honestly, because of the extensive nature of his brother's allergies, there's a lot of foods that he's never consumed because we don't keep them in our home. We don't buy them at the store. It's just not in our routine. We don't eat them out. So I live with the concern that he may have allergies to more things I don't know about. But in the extensive testing that's done up front through your program, can it pinpoint allergies to things that he's never consumed? Or does he have to have had some level of exposure for us to get the right diagnosis or treatment plan?
Well, first of all, thanks for those comments. I appreciate that. And that's an excellent question. I'll say 2 things. One is, the idea that, you're a 3-year-old and you have these types of values, and let's say you're never in any sort of treatment model, right? You have these values to peanut, nuts, etc. That same patient, when they're 5 years old and 10 years old, will have dramatically different values. Right. So the immune system is constantly adapting itself and producing different types of markers. That is one of the challenges, in the allergy space, because imagine you have data from 2 years ago and now you're seeing a 5-year-old and you assume that the data hasn't changed and you go and start some sort of blind form of treatment. You can see where that can be problematic, right? So ultimately what you're asking is, do we have enough predictive analytics to say, can we predict what happens in the future? The answer is yes, as long as one thing has happened, and that is, you have to be old enough to have at least an immune system that can, produce the array of antibodies, number one. Number two, they have to have some type of broad diet, right? Like if you said, well, my son only eats rice and potatoes, I would say, okay, that's a little tricky, right? Because there's not even any type of biosimilar model that's in place. But I'm assuming that's not the case. And the short answer is yes. If you get in and get tested and you have at least some type of broad diet, we're going to give you an answer that with a high degree of accuracy.
Okay, and I think his diet's pretty broad because now he's also eating what his brother's eating in terms of treatment foods and maintenance, not treatment, but maintenance foods and things like that. So I think there probably would be enough. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Next up is Diane.
Hi, doctor. Thank you so much for the work that you do. I'm calling on behalf of my nephew. He is 15 years old, and he has had a dairy allergy for as long as we've known. He was diagnosed around 1 year old. He also had an egg, which he outgrew to the point of being able to eat it in baked products. My question is, it's perceived that he possibly may have this allergy because he was given antibiotics at birth. As a toddler, his stool was tested and it was found to be lacking some bacteria that was necessary. And so he was put on a probiotic, but then his level for the milk went from like 20 up over 100. So he was taken off of that. And since then, various people have wanted to put him on different probiotics, but we've been nervous, not knowing what that would do. So he's really lived a life of avoidance. My sister and brother-in-law are very seriously considering, we're in New York, but making the arrangements to join your program. My question, listening to all of this, is do you treat the gut microbiome or test for that? Or is that something they should do prior to coming to like strengthen his immune system? And we're just confused how to do that. And if you did that, that'd be great.
No, thank you. It's a very good question. Again, I've been in this space for 2 decades, and in 2 decades, I've seen 2 areas that received, tens of millions of dollars of investment and funding, which ultimately did not move us further along. One of them is vitamin D. Lots of research done on vitamin D supplementation and allergy and food allergy, ultimately leading us nowhere. And then the second area is kind of probiotics. I'm not going to say gut microbiome because I do believe the gut microbiome has a lot of interaction and network with the immune system, and certainly has a role in many different organ systems in our body. But the idea that, various amounts of probiotics can be beneficial to food allergy has been studied both in, pregnant moms to, young children, and then of course, patients who actually have the condition itself. And in and of itself, probiotics by themselves did not ameliorate the disease, did not make food allergies any better. The short answer to your question is I'm not a fan of probiotics in this case, and I say this for 2 reasons. When you're building databases and using data science, what you need is a relatively equal playing field, and what that means is I need an immune system that's as normal as possible, and I need an anatomy. I need anatomy of the gut, lungs, etc., that is functioning normally. When you start adding probiotics, it does change the dynamics of the immune system in the GI tract, and it often acts as an immune system distraction. And I think much to your nephew's case, when you put like lactobacillus in the gut as a probiotic, there are proteins present in the lactobacillus that can definitively switch the immune system towards a more Th2 or allergic phenotype. And in that case, if you happen to get some mild exposure to dairy around the same 6-month time frame, it could completely skyrocket and elicit his values. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, right. I guess just if his gut was lacking in something that it would need to be more successful in your program, would you be looking for that? Because as a toddler, it was tested and he was shown to be like 0 on something that the average person does have. And they're not necessarily fans of probiotics. They'll do, whatever you say. But if it is lacking something that the normal eating person should have, is that something you look for and somehow replicate or provide? Or
again, absolutely yes. We are multidisciplinary in our approach. We have patients who have inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, different types of gut disease. So we're well versed in kind of how to approach the GI tract. We work hand in hand with GI doctors across the country. So whether they have one or don't have one, you can make those arrangements. But yeah, we will pay particular attention to.
Okay. Yeah, no, he's not being treated for it at all right now. And I guess that was why I wanted to ask, because I didn't know if that's something they should do prior to seeing you, but it almost sounds like no, because different doctors may put him on different probiotics, which could actually hinder the work you may do.
Yeah, and I think one thing we're very proud of here is that we are absolutely signing up. When you sign up with us, we are signing up with you, and we're going to quarterback your case, right? We're going to take your case no matter what other kind of medical issues are going on. I mean, again, within the scope of what we do well, we're going to try and help you to try and get to that point and get you to that next level, which is going to be key. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, I'd say, get on board first, let us understand what's going on, and then we will reach out and actually have those discussions with the specialist.
Thank you. It's good to know that you don't just view that as a separate, but you take into account the immune system being in the gut and all of that. Okay. Thank you again, doctor, for your hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, we got about 20 more minutes. We'll try and get to as many questions as we can. Next is Lijo.
Hi, doctor. So I have my 3-year-old daughter. She has a peanut allergy. I understand that during the treatment, there are like specialized food that she has to eat along with the gummies for the tip. So the concern that I have is like she is a very, very picky eater. She doesn't eat even normal food. If we give some food today, she may not eat the next day. So in that case, do you recommend she having treatment like a couple of years down the line? Maybe she would start by that time. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, that's a difficult, situation. I would say that, most individuals, who are kind of in your situation, what they'll typically do is kind of get tested, right? Because one of the benefits of getting tested is that at the very least, we can open up her diet, right? We can actually say, there's a bunch of foods here that you can eat and you go ahead and can clear. We can do those via food challenges, or many of them are actually so safe you can do them at home. And that helps a patient who's very picky, right? They're picky for different reasons. I really believe that young toddlers are picky when it comes to food allergy because they will often know what a small amount of histamine feels like and say, I don't like this, I think this is risky. And so ultimately getting tested and at least starting and expanding the diet is a good way to go, because then if you want to take a break afterwards, no problem, and let her develop a little bit more, but at least we've expanded the diet in a logical way so that, when you come back in a year or whatever it may be, it's actually faster and easier to clear the rest of the primary allergens.
Okay. And I have a follow-up question. This is for me. So I am 36 years old. So I have I have an issue with the hives actually. I get hives when I eat histamine-rich food. That's what I noticed, like something like spinach, lettuce, or like a cheese. Sometimes it doesn't come like every time I eat, but sometimes I get hives, and then I take Sirtec at that time, and then it goes off. So is there any I have consulted with many doctors, but there isn't any IG values associated with any of these food. And so I am concerned, like, is there any treatment for that one? Is it allergy? Is what? Yeah.
That's a complicated question. Obviously hard for me to give you a specific answer, via this type of interface. But I'd say it's important to remember, and this actually does apply to all patients with food allergies as well, is that there is a threshold, right? There's a threshold that ultimately causes hives, and there's a threshold that ultimately can cause anaphylaxis. What feeds that threshold are many factors. So some of it is your ambient immune system function. Some of it is inflammation from infections. Some of it is inflammation from injuries. Some of it is inflammation from pollens and bacteria. And so all these factors come into play. And then you add to it the endocrine system, which is basically your hormones. And the hormones could also be yet another factor. However you approach this in the future, you want to address all of those things. And what you want to do is lower that threshold, or you want to actually say raise the threshold and keep some distance between what it takes to trigger, those symptoms. Often in cases like yours, to be, just give you a short answer, you have to look at much more towards the autoimmune system and autoimmune phenomenon to try to, identify, what's going on.
Okay. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you. All right. Next up is Lacey. Hi, Lacey.
Hi, I'm coming from the East Coast. So yeah, hoping to get one here, but we'll work it out and come to you. My daughter is 9, so she's pretty good age for this, I think. And I'm glad to hear earlier you said that it didn't seem to make things like asthma or eczema worse. She doesn't have it terrible yet, but sometimes during puberty it can get worse. So that's, of course, on my mind to make sure I'm not making something else worse. She has one other condition that I would be concerned could get worse. And I don't know if you've ever worked with it, but have you ever had someone come who has cold-induced urticaria, which of course displays as an allergy, but it's really more of an immune condition?
It's a great question. Yes, we've had many patients with different forms of spontaneous urticaria that's not food allergy mediated. So again, as I mentioned, we want an immune system that's, quote, stable and normal, and we want a gut, or I should say anatomy, skin in this case, that's also doing really well. Again, being multidisciplinary helps, so we can work with your dermatologist or your allergist or ourselves, and we can get it under control. What we would want to do in a case like your daughter's is to make sure that she is stable and under control for at least 3 months. From a cold urticaria standpoint. Once we have that under control, the rest of our system will do its job and treat the food anaphylaxis issues. I think an interesting thing that we've noticed with our patients who have these types of forms of urticaria, which are largely called cholinergic urticaria. Once we get them through the program, their cholinergic urticaria gets much better. And yet we're not treating that, right? So just that we're doing something at a histamine side that's changing that threshold, and it seems to make a big difference.
That's what I was wondering. It might just, there's always hope, that it would just sort of temper everything a little bit, We're pretty good at managing it. The only time where it can be very, very hard is spring. And we don't like to do scratch tests in the spring because that's when she gets her cold urticaria. I think it's just, the stacking of the pollen in the trees. So how do you handle, those type of allergies, and does it disrupt the TIP program?
No, it's all built and blended together. So we'll look at her case and say, okay, what's her immune system landscape like? How do her B cells and T cells work? What are her actual food allergens, and what are her pollen factors that are at play? Is there any underlying inflammation that we're missing? And then of course we're going to go into, the urticaria side. It'll all be blended. That's the beauty of applied math, right? This is all going to be organized in such a way that it minimizes the chance of disruption. I will say there's some logic around, if you definitely know a season is a time when things are worse, just let us know that, and then we can kind of take that whole framework and shift it up or pull it back to make sure that we're doing things at the right time during that season.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking maybe we start in the summer or fall or something like that. On the same topic, but last part of that is, does puberty come into play? Do you think that it's a good or a bad time to do it? We try to get ahead of it, or, does it disrupt things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say, to be fair, it's not a large problem. It's not like we have a significant percentage of patients. I even argue it's not even a 1% of our patients, but we do have cases, particularly when girls start their menstrual cycles, that first 6 months of those menses can be problematic. What I mean by that is, if you just need to be aware of it, you need to let us know, and we need to give you a different, approach to it. When you're trying to manage it on your own, that's where things can be a little bit hairy, and we don't want that. But other than that, I'd say that'd be the only one that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you so much for answering my questions.
Awesome, thank you. All right, next is Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Dr. Randhawa, can you hear me okay?
Yep, real good.
Thank you so much for the work you do. I have a 7-year-old son who is anaphylactic to most tree nuts. And my question to you is, what is the risk of him developing conditions like eosinophilic esophagitis, for example, that we know is from consuming allergenic foods, or other autoimmune conditions as a result of TIP?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer the second part first. So autoimmune conditions, when you have over 20,000 patients historically in a system, you can actually start to do population-based studies, meaning like you can say, all right, do we see an increased incidence of asthma? Do we see an increased incidence of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, like an autoimmune condition? And at least to date, with 22,000 patients now through the system, we cannot say that anything we're doing has an increased incidence of an autoimmune condition compared to the general population. In fact, there's an argument that we have slightly less than the general population, which I think is just a reflection of what we're doing as far as the therapeutic model. As far as the EOE side, eosinophilic esophagitis, we worked very hard at the beginning of the program to try to identify which patients are going to actually be at greatest risk for the actual problem itself. So there are markers that we can mathematically use and predict. Generally speaking, if EOE pops up during TIP, which again is very rare, it's almost always in those cases where we flagged it early. And so when we flag it early, depending on level of risk, we almost want the patient to get tested, like, go get an endoscopy, give us the information. But we understand parents don't want to, do that. They don't want to put their kid under sedation, and we understand that as well. So 2 points. One is we do try to predict early. It's rare if it happens. And then if it happens, the management of it is quite strong. It's very good. Again, 5% of our patients come into the program with active EOE. We're able to get it under control, get them through TIP, and then their long-term outcomes are really excellent.
So it actually becomes like a cure for their EOE too, because they've built the tolerance. Is that sort of how you're treating? Wow.
That's correct. And that's for anaphylaxis with EOE, right? Remember, anaphylaxis EOE is a very small group of total EOE patients. Most EOE patients have just bad reflux. So I just want to be very clear that, we're talking about those who have food anaphylaxis. But yes, that's correct.
All right. And then are you going to publish your data in the near future?
Which part of our data? We've been publishing for about 9 to 10 years now.
Oh, okay. So specifically about the TIP and outcomes.
Yep. You can, we'll have our team send you some information if you'd like. It's on our websites. And as far as like EOE based data, we have not put that out there yet. It's something that we want to do, but it's complicated because EOE is very much multifactorial, and we're just trying to understand how to position that in a manuscript to get it out there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next is Armira.
Hello. Good evening, because I'm talking from Europe, Albania. It's a country near Italy. Very happy to be here. So my daughter is 3.5 years old, and she has food allergies to milk, egg, tree nut, and pistachio. And we actually are.
Oh, sorry, did we lose her? I think we lost her. All right, we'll see if she pops back up. Next up is Eliza.
Hello. I have a 4-year-old who I believe is allergic to peanuts and possibly tree nuts. He presented with a rash on his face when I gave him peanut butter at around 10 months old, but he had previously had it for around 3 months, almost daily, with no reactions. After that 10-month-old reaction, I was told to avoid it, which we did. And I got him in for testing when he was around 2 years old. And he tested with blood work and skin prick testing on his back for peanut and, all the major tree nuts. Nothing popped up for peanut in his blood work or on his skin prick test, but in both the skin and the blood, very low levels for cashew and pistachio. Shortly after that, we proceeded to doing an oral food challenge for peanut, and he passed. Flash forward, 2 years later, he's a very picky eater. He has not wanted to eat any peanut products or nut products, so I haven't been able to really see what that's like at this point. But I did recently take him back to the doctor, and he got blood work done, and it showed that he had elevated levels for peanut and for all the major tree nuts. So at this point, I'm kind of disheartened. I don't know what to do. I thought we had, tested out a peanut, and we were in kind of a safe zone with it, even though I know he does not, regularly eat it at all. Once again, he's a very picky eater. This last school year, he was very sick, very often. Lots of viruses, lots of bugs seem to hit our household. He was also recently stung by a wasp about a week before he did the blood work. So I don't know if like that affected his histamine levels, affected his immunity system, and like what's kind of going on now. I'm just kind of lost and confused and feeling overwhelmed. So he's never had a true anaphylactic reaction. The only thing that he has ever had is on his face. He's had redness. And I was told 2 years ago, when he passed his oral food challenge with peanuts, a little bit of redness popped up on his face, like just a few spots, maybe 2 or 3. And I was just told he gets contact rash, and he passed. But 2 years later, when we went back for the blood work, it's showing elevations in all of these nuts, peanuts and tree nuts. So I kind of don't know what to do from here.
Yeah, I hear you. And I know that's very frustrating. This is exactly the problem, with this idea of saying, okay, we're going to test you, and we believe these numbers are fixed. If you look at, the 25 million people who have food anaphylaxis over the age of 18, 2/3 of them develop food anaphylaxis as an adult, and they do it to foods that they previously consumed. Imagine, right? So they were consuming a certain food for a number of years, and then all of a sudden they start having symptoms, and all of a sudden they're anaphylactic to it. So it's a moving target, and it's an important thing to recognize. So when he was younger, his immune system is also in a different position. He was able to consume some amount of peanut. And I encourage everyone, you can go online and you can see the studies done in the 90s where they really tried to do these early peanut challenges. And then what they actually came up with a term, and they deemed it recurrent peanut allergy, because some of these kids would be able to pass a peanut challenge. They would consume peanut, here or there in kind of an unstandardized way. And then 3 years later, they have an anaphylactic reaction to peanut. That's very disheartening. And so again, what we do here is dramatically different. We're going to assess the immune system where it is right now. We're going to use the data, the trillions and trillions of data points from all of the cases we've treated so far. And we're going to forecast for your son where his immune system is heading. And that predictive analytics is something that, again, we're the only people doing it, not only in the food allergy space. I question, who else is doing it in modern medicine. There's a few companies trying to dabble, but we take this side very seriously. So yeah, if you're to enroll him here, I'm sure we can answer all those questions, better identify what's going on with his immune system. He probably has a bit of a slower or weaker immune system that we have to also take into consideration. And in the end, I'm sure it can be managed and be able to consume not only peanut, but all of the tree nuts as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure he sounded like a good candidate, because he's never had, once again, like a true anaphylactic reaction.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something we typically see, but he's also very young. And the numbers, again, when you're using numbers with the right perspective, it makes a whole lot of difference, right? So we're going to study his data points across all the similar folks who are like him, and we can then kind of get a pretty good assessment of what his risk is towards anaphylaxis. Perfect, thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to Armira. Again, I know you got cut off. Can you hear us again?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to be really quick. I was saying my 3-year-old daughter, she has different food allergies, and for the milk, she had anaphylactic twice. She was in the ER. So we're doing right now on OIT program. She's let's say it's going well, because we are increasing the amount of food that she's allergic to, milk included, and she is reacting very, very good. And my question is, for those who can't do keep, let's say, with you in America, due to, I don't know, different reason, not only economical one, but it's even a matter of visas, for example, in our case. Do you suggest other kind of treatments? I mean, OIT we are doing right now, or not? Because just right now, for example, some doctors suggest to use during the treatments even probiotics or vitamin D. And what do you think about that? And the last question is it possible to do visit with you, maybe the once a year and to decide, let's say, the kind of treatment to do then in our country, or is this something that can, work just because you have to analyze all the data and so on? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to answer the series of points that were made there. As far as, again, sounds like your daughter's in some form of OIT for dairy. It seems to be tolerating that well. That's great. Again, look, you're in a unique situation. You have access to at least an allergist who does some form of treatment. I'll tell you that's not the case in many countries. And so, if you feel like you can make some progress with that, I'd say by all means, if you feel like it's working well and you get to some baseline level of safety, that's something that's worth considering. As far as, the ability for, someone to come over here and you brought the issues around visas and so forth. We have over 1,100, 1,200 international patients who fly here. We have not had any issues because we actually will document for you the medical necessity and the medical form of travel that's tied to what we do. So even in the last 6 months, we've not had any concerns regarding the visa situation. As far as the ability to kind of visit with us once and then have a local person do it, that is much more an issue of the safety of our program. I mean, again, it's not as simple as saying, okay, have an allergist go ahead and conduct this challenge and so on and so forth. They have to understand what this program is and how it operates. And from a legal structure, from a legal standpoint, and from a licensing standpoint, there's a lot of rules that restrict what we can do across different countries. So the short answer is no. We do have to own the entire case, within at least the remote side of what we do, and of course, coming in for actual challenges. We believe that is the safest, kind of method to do this forward. I'm very proud of the fact that we've never had a real serious adverse event in 20 years. I think that says a lot and speaks volumes to what we're able to accomplish. So we're almost at time. I'm just going to take one more question. We'll go and ask Natasha here. Go and unmute, please.
Hi, I'm Tony and Natasha's husband. We're sitting here listening. Thank you for your time. We've been going through the program. We love the program, and one of the things I'm trying to understand is why allergies aren't treated by insurance as like a life-threatening thing, and for example, and therefore not covering things like the blood panel. I think it was like $2,000, even though her out-of-pocket maximum was met. Is there any progress in that space to change the way that they're viewing allergies and covering stuff like this more? And I guess I'm just wondering why the blood panel service wasn't covered by insurance, even though it's something completely necessary to making sure that we find out all of her allergies instead of just picking 8 potential allergies at a typical allergist.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you that I've been in healthcare now for 25 years, and I'm amazed at how bad our system is. I mean, really, it's a system that is not adapted to technology, is not adapted to kind of the needs of different disease groups, particularly, food allergy being one. I mentioned in my presentation earlier that just look at how poorly funded food allergy is compared to everything else.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense, right? And we put this on our back, to build a diagnostics lab that's at our level of regulation and our level of function costs a lot of money. And we're the only one to do this so far, in the world. And despite having all the appropriate certifications and such, we can't get insurance companies to say, yeah, we'll cover that. What they'll say is, yeah, it sounds good, but they can go to Quest or LabCorp and they can run a few tests and that's good enough. We would then go back with our attorneys and say, actually, Quest has stated that they are unable to produce the same lab results. And then we would have crickets from the insurance company. They simply would ignore anything we say. Despite all these years of this effort, we did get some very small contracts last year. and we're trying to work with those. But what your question is really a higher level question, which is how come the federal agencies, DHS, Department of Health Services, why are these organizations not taking food anaphylaxis more seriously? And I'm going to call out, the nonprofit groups out there as well. If you have FAIR and organizations like this out there, how come they're not out there trying to push and get things done for these patients? And look, we're going to keep fighting our fight as best we can, but ultimately it is power to the people. I mean, if people, make enough noise, they start to listen. And I'll tell you that we've had many patients who take that bill that you mentioned, and they will appeal it all the way up to the top of the courts in their individual states. And I almost believe that they've never lost. So they've actually, DHS will actually force the insurance company to pay in full the cost of those labs. And the last thing I'll mention is this. If Quest ran the exact same labs we ran, it would cost about $9,500. So we are running it as narrow as possible to actually just get it done. And trust me, it's beyond frustrating for me, being in this space for so long, that they continue to ignore and play games at the cost of those who suffer from food allergies. So, but hey, look, I want to end it on a positive note, and thank everybody for their time. I hope you found this useful. I really just wanted to break down these different therapeutic models as black and white as possible. I think that's important. I encourage anybody to learn more about our program. You can call our enrollment team, go online, and check out really what the outcomes look like for what we're doing in as much of not only a transparent format, but really in a comparative format. And then lastly, I'd say when we have events or more webinars like this, please join in, let other people know about it. I think the more that this becomes the standard of care, the more people hear that term, it will really change the landscape of what food allergy therapeutics look like, and we can really get out to the masses as quickly as possible. So with that said, I want to thank everybody. We'll have another one of these next month, and hope to see you then. Wish you all a very good day. Thank you.